In 1735, one of the most respected scientists in the world officially classified the Kraken as a real animal. Not a myth, not a sailor's tale told over bad rum. A classified species, listed by name in the Systema Naturae, the most important biological catalog of the 18th century, written by Carl Linnaeus himself. The man who gave us the scientific naming system we still use today. The man whose work became the foundation of modern biology. That man looked at the evidence in front of him and decided the Kraken was real enough to put in the book. Then he removed it from the next edition and never explained why. That detail has bothered historians of science for almost 300 years, because the removal wasn't accompanied by a retraction, a correction, or an explanation. Linnaeus simply stopped listing it. The species entry disappeared between the 9th edition and the 10th, as quietly as if it had never been there. And the accounts that convinced him to include it in the first place, they didn't go away. They kept coming. From different oceans, different navies, different centuries. Same creature. You want to know what was out there? And honestly, after everything I found digging into this one, so did the empires. Now, let's talk about what was in the water. Here's something you need to understand about Golden Age sailors before we go any further. They were not superstitious fools. That's the easy dismissal, the one that lets us feel comfortable with our modern certainty, and it is completely wrong. The men who sailed during the Golden Age of piracy, roughly 1650 to 1730, were professional observers in a way that almost no one today can claim to be. Their lives depended on reading information correctly. Wind direction, current patterns, weather systems, depth measurements, coastline shapes, the behavior of birds and fish at specific latitudes. Get any of it wrong, and you die. Simple as that. These were men who could read a change in ocean color and know they were approaching a continental shelf. Men who could smell land before they could see it. Men who could feel a storm coming 3 days before it arrived by the way the ship moved through the water. They weren't guessing. They were processing sensory data with the kind of precision that takes years of hard experience to develop. By the time a merchant captain in 1700 was making decisions about where to sail, he had 15 or 20 years of continuous ocean observation behind him. So when dozens of these men, across different nations, different decades, different oceans, all described the same creature using the same language, the question isn't whether they were imagining things. The question is what they actually saw. The word Kraken comes from Old Norse, from the word for something twisted, something gnarled and strange. The Norse had been reporting it since at least the 12th century, and the earliest written records treat it as established knowledge rather than a new discovery. Eric Pontoppidan, the Bishop of Bergen, documented accounts systematically in 1752 and published them in his Natural History of Norway. He wasn't writing mythology. He was compiling testimony from working fishermen and ship captains the way a modern journalist would compile witness statements. His methodology was careful. He cross-referenced accounts, noted inconsistencies, discarded what seemed embellished, and worked with what remained. His conclusion, after weighing the evidence, was that the creature was real and probably the largest living thing in the ocean. The Portuguese had their own name for it. So did the Arab navigators who dominated the Indian Ocean trade routes and whose sailors had been traveling those waters longer than Europeans had been sailing at all. The Japanese had records going back to the medieval period. And when European empires began crossing the Atlantic and building the trade networks that made the golden age of piracy possible, their captains started encountering something in the deep water that matched all of those older descriptions exactly. Same size, same behavior, same unmistakable appearance. Not because the sailors were all reading the same books. Most of them couldn't read at all. I want to tell you about Pierre Denys de Montfort, because his story cuts straight to the center of what this whole subject really is. Not just a mystery about a sea creature, but a story about what happens to the people who take the evidence seriously. Montfort was a French naturalist, born in 1766, trained in the tradition of Enlightenment science, a student of the ocean in the way that the best minds of his era devoted themselves to cataloging the natural world. He was not a crank. He was not a sensationalist. He was a careful researcher who spent years collecting and cross-referencing the accounts of sailors and fishermen, traveling to port cities specifically to interview men who had just come in from long voyages. And what he found convinced him completely. In 1801, he published his findings in a 2-volume work called Natural History of Mollusks. And in it, he documented 2 cases that he believed were definitive. 2 French warships that had gone down off the coast of Angola during calm weather with no storm recorded, no navigational hazard charted, no enemy engagement reported. They simply vanished. And the accounts from the few survivors described something that had come up from beneath the surface and taken the ships. The language in those survivor accounts is striking in how consistent it is. These were men who had been separated from each other after the event, who had no opportunity to compare notes before being interviewed, who had every reason to describe a storm or a navigation error rather than something no one would believe. And they all described the same thing. In 1802, following a major naval disaster in which 10 British warships and 4 French vessels disappeared during an Atlantic crossing, Montfort made a public claim. He argued in print that the creature he had documented was responsible. The ships had been lost in calm conditions, no storm, no battle, no navigational hazard that could be identified afterward, just gone. He named the creature. He presented his evidence. He made his case in the most public forum available to a naturalist, in Paris. The Navy court-martialed him for it. Not for getting the science wrong. There was no counter-evidence presented, no alternative explanation offered that actually fit the circumstances. They court-martialed him for the embarrassment of the claim itself, for the implication that the most powerful naval forces in the world had been beaten not by weather, not by the enemy, not by navigation error, but by something that wasn't supposed to exist. An empire's naval reputation could not accommodate that explanation, regardless of whether the explanation was true. The consequences were total. His scientific reputation was destroyed. Publishers stopped accepting his work. Academic institutions closed their doors. He spent the years after 1802 trying to rebuild through increasingly desperate means, writing popular natural history, seeking patronage, attempting to produce work that would earn him enough credibility to be heard again. He died in poverty in 1820, found on a Paris street. 19 years of declining circumstances, all of it traceable back to the moment he insisted on taking his evidence seriously in public. But here's what they couldn't take from him. The log entries survived. The testimony he had collected from captains and sailors who had no reason to lie, no connection to each other, no shared incentive to invent the same story. That testimony went into archives, and when researchers started pulling it back out in the 20th century, they found something the French Admiralty had clearly hoped would stay buried. The descriptions matched across independent sources, across decades, across different ocean regions. Same physical description, same approach pattern, same aftermath. And that tells you everything about why Montfort was silenced. It wasn't that he was wrong. It was that he was right in a way the official story couldn't accommodate. Now I want to give you something you won't find in most treatments of this subject. Because when historians talk about Golden Age pirates and their relationship with the sea, they skip right past something that's sitting in the historical record, quiet and specific, and impossible to explain away cleanly. Blackbeard kept a logbook. Most people know that. What they don't always know is what was in it. Edward Teach, the man history remembers as Blackbeard, was a meticulous record keeper. This surprises people who encounter it for the first time, because the popular image of Blackbeard is pure chaos. The burning fuses braided into his beard, the theatrical entrance, the deliberate cultivation of terror as a tactical tool. But the logbook tells a different story. A captain who tracked weather patterns carefully, noted current behavior, recorded depths, logged the movements of other vessels in his area. A professional navigator who used fear as a weapon and kept very careful notes on everything else. In those notes, there are specific coordinates, specific stretches of ocean that Blackbeard marked and that he ordered his fleet to avoid. Not because of reefs, not because of known naval patrols. The entries don't give hazards or enemies. They give something else. Blackbeard, in his personal log, was not generally cautious with words. He wrote about violence directly, about prizes bluntly. But on these particular coordinates, he was careful, precise in a way that stands out from everything around it. He had encountered something in those waters. He had made a decision. And he had written the coordinates down specifically so that he and anyone else reading that log would know to go around. Every single time. Adding as many as 10 extra days to his route rather than cross through certain stretches of the Caribbean and the Atlantic approaches. 10 days. That is not a small decision for a pirate captain running tight supplies, managing crew morale, staying ahead of naval pursuit. Blackbeard was not a cautious man. He calculated that 10 extra days was still the safer option. He never wrote directly what he saw. What survived are the coordinates and the decisions. And if you plot those coordinates on a modern bathymetric chart, a map that shows ocean depth rather than just ocean surface, the pattern that emerges is not random. He was avoiding the deep water, consistently. The places where the seafloor drops away into depths that were completely unmeasurable with the tools available in the early 18th century. The transition zones from the shallow continental shelf to the true deep ocean, where something could come up from below and you would have no warning at all. Here is what a giant squid actually is, because I think this matters more than any of the historical testimony, and I want you to sit with these details. For most of human history, giant squid existed only in pieces. A beak here recovered from a sperm whale's stomach, a fragment of arm there washed onto a beach, sections of tentacle, sometimes as thick as a man's torso, found floating in open water. In 1857, a Danish naturalist named Japetus Steenstrup examined a single beak found in the stomach contents of a sperm whale caught in the North Atlantic. He measured it, compared it systematically to known squid anatomy, and published a paper arguing that it belonged to a species of enormous cephalopod that had never been formally described. He gave it a scientific name, Architeuthis dux, the ruling squid. The scientific community accepted his findings, not with enthusiasm, not with celebration, but the species entered the official record as real, which meant that every sailor, every naturalist, every dismissed and ridiculed account going back centuries was suddenly carrying a different weight. A fully grown giant squid can reach 18 meters in total length. That is longer than a school bus. The arms are equipped with suckers lined with sharp, serrated chitinous rings that cut into whatever they grip. The bite, delivered from a hard beak at the center of the arms, can exert enough force to crush through bone. The eyes are the largest of any animal on Earth, up to 27 centimeters in diameter, roughly the size of a dinner plate. They evolved that size for one reason: to function in near total darkness at extreme depth, where even the faintest bioluminescent light is enough to detect movement and shape if your eye is large enough to collect it. Those eyes are specifically built to see in the dark, to track movement, to process shape and silhouette where nothing else can see at all. They hunt between 300 and 1,000 meters below the surface, usually. But they come shallower when driven upward by something larger. And here is the predator relationship that sits at the bottom of this whole story. Sperm whales hunt giant squid, diving to extraordinary depths, using echolocation to track them in the dark. The whales carry evidence of these hunts on their bodies: circular scars from squid suckers, some measuring over 40 centimeters across, pressed into skin on animals that weigh 40 tons. When a sperm whale drives prey upward from that depth, the prey moves fast. An animal driven from 700 meters toward the surface is not coming up gradually. It is moving vertically through water that goes from crushing darkness to relative brightness in minutes. A ship on the surface of the ocean is, from underneath, a very specific silhouette, especially at night. Especially if you are an animal whose entire sensory architecture is built around identifying the outlines of things at extreme distance and deciding whether they are predator, prey, or something else. A hull moving through water creates pressure waves, vibrations, turbulence. A wooden sailing ship, with its deep keel and complex underwater profile, creates a signature that would read as something alive to an animal tuned to find living things in the dark. And here is the part of this story that gets far less attention than it deserves: the wrecks. Across the historical record of the golden age of piracy, there is a pattern of ships lost in calm conditions that has never been fully explained by conventional maritime history. Ships that went down without storm damage. Ships found, when found at all, with hull damage that doesn't match the signature of reef collision, rock impact, structural failure from age, or cannon. Some of them show what forensic maritime engineers describe as compression stress, the kind of deformation you get when something presses on the hull from the outside. Curved inward rather than splintered outward. Stressed at multiple points around the beam rather than at a single impact site. Compression. Like something wrapped around the hull. I am not telling you the Kraken sank those ships. What I'm telling you is that the damage on those wrecks has never been given an explanation that fits the physical evidence. And the most scientifically credible candidate for an animal large enough and strong enough to produce that kind of damage in calm water has been confirmed to exist. We have photographs. We have footage. We know what they can do. What we don't know is how large the largest ones get. Drop a comment right now. One word. What do you think those sailors actually saw? I want to see your answers before we get to the end of this. Let me take you through the cultural pattern, because this is the thing that should settle the mass delusion argument once and for all. The Norse accounts go back to the 12th century at minimum. The description that comes through consistently is an animal that surfaces like an island. Sailors who didn't recognize it sometimes anchored nearby. The animal would then submerge, creating a disturbance in the water large enough to drag smaller vessels under. The detail that gets the most attention is always the island comparison. But the detail that interests me is the behavior, the diving, the surface disturbance. That is a coherent physical description of what happens when something very large submerges quickly in open water. The displacement creates exactly that turbulence. The Norse weren't describing magic. They were describing physics. They just didn't have the vocabulary for hydrodynamics. The Portuguese, sailing the coast of Africa and out into the Atlantic during the 15th and 16th centuries, documented encounters with something in the deep water that specifically targeted their smaller vessels. Larger ships in the same area survived. This suggests selective behavior. A predator assesses size. It chooses targets that are manageable. The Portuguese accounts describe arms coming over the railing of smaller vessels, consistent with what we know about how large cephalopods engage with objects near the surface. The Arab navigators who had dominated the Indian Ocean for centuries had their own name, and what is distinctive about the Arab records is the emphasis on intelligence, not on size, though size is noted, on deliberateness, the way it approached ships carefully, the way it seems to assess before committing. This is consistent with what modern cephalopod research has established. Giant squid have distributed nervous systems, with roughly 2/3 of their neurons located in their arms rather than in their central brain, allowing for independent processing and rapid response. They are not mindless. They make decisions. Caribbean pirates operating in the warm waters where the shallow Caribbean shelf drops into the deep Atlantic trenches reported encounters in specific geographic areas with enough consistency to form a pattern. Plot those encounter zones on a bathymetric map, and they cluster at the transition zones, at the edges of the shelf, where an animal living in deep water could reach the surface while remaining close to the depths where it fed. Royal Navy officers documented encounters in official correspondence never intended to be public. Several of these documents were only declassified in the 20th century. They don't use the word Kraken. They describe large animals of unknown species that had damaged or interfered with vessels. The language is careful, professional, deeply uncomfortable to read if you understand what you're looking at. These are men whose careers depended on credibility, describing something they clearly did not want to describe. And all of them, Norse fishermen, Portuguese explorers, Arab navigators, Caribbean pirates, Royal Navy officers, all of them said the same thing about the eyes. Large, wrong, looking at you. Not looking through you the way a fish looks, looking at you. The way something that understands what looking means looks at another thing. Every account, every century, every ocean. The eyes. In 2004, a Japanese research team finally got the photograph. Tsunemi Kubodera and Kyoichi Mori had spent years designing the attempt. They worked with a long line baited specifically to attract large cephalopods, deployed at 900 meters depth in the North Pacific near the Ogasawara Islands, where deep water comes close to the surface and sperm whale populations feed regularly. They waded through multiple deployments, reset lines, analyzed data from previous attempts. Then, the squid came. The photographs showed an animal at 900 meters that measured approximately 8 meters in the frame. It had come up from somewhere below 900 meters. It attacked the bait aggressively, methodically, wrapping its tentacles around the long line and pulling with force that was evident in how the line deformed in the images. In the struggle, it lost an arm. The arm was retrieved with the bait rig. It measured 5.5 meters. 8-meter animal, 5.5-meter arm, 900 meters depth. Scientists working with the images noted this was likely a juvenile or young adult. Giant squid grow throughout their lifetimes without a fixed endpoint. The largest specimens, extrapolated from beak size and body mass relationships established from smaller complete specimens, suggest adult sizes reaching 18 meters or more. In 2006, Kubodera's team captured the first video footage of a living giant squid in its natural environment. The footage shows an animal moving through deep water with speed and clear intent, illuminated by the lights of the research submersible. Moving, deciding, turning toward the camera. The eyes are what people talk about when they see that footage. Kubodera described the experience in terms unusual for a scientist of his reserve. He said looking at those images changed his understanding of what the ocean was. Not what lived in it, what it was. There is a specific moment in the footage where the animal holds still, facing the camera directly, the lights of the submersible reflecting off those enormous eyes. And in that moment, you understand with complete clarity what every sailor meant when they described the sense of being seen, of being assessed. The Norse accounts, the Portuguese records, the Arab navigators, the pirates, and the naval officers, all of them tried to describe that moment in whatever language was available to them. Some of them called it supernatural. Some of them wrote it in logbooks in careful, neutral language, and hoped their captains would understand what they meant. They all meant the same thing. Something looked at them. Not at their ship, not at the movement in the water, at them. Let's go back to Linnaeus. In 1735, Systema Naturae includes the Kraken. The entry is brief, but it is there, listed among real animals, classified according to the same methodology Linnaeus used for everything else. He had the Pontoppidan compilation to draw from. He had accounts from Scandinavian naturalists and fishermen that had been circulating in European scientific circles for years. He weighed the evidence and decided it met the standard. Then in 1758, the 10th edition, the one that modern taxonomy uses as its baseline, the Kraken is gone. No note, no retraction. No explanation in correspondence that has ever been found. Linnaeus was a meticulous record keeper. The gap where an explanation should be is more informative than almost anything he could have written. Something changed. Either the evidence changed in a way he couldn't publicly acknowledge, or the pressure around the evidence changed in a way that made including it professionally untenable. We don't know which. Somewhere in the deep water right now, in the dark at 900 meters and below, animals are moving that we have never seen whole. Animals whose full adult size we can only estimate from fragments. Animals with the largest eyes on Earth and the neurological architecture to use them in near total darkness. Animals that have been sharing the ocean with human ships for as long as human ships have existed, in waters that cover 70% of the Earth's surface and reach depths of 11,000 meters. Waters that we have explored less thoroughly than the surface of Mars. The pirates sailed above them. They knew it. They wrote it down in log entries, in coordinates marked for avoidance, in carefully worded official correspondence, in naturalist reports that got men court-martialed and died poor on Paris streets. Blackbeard went around 10 extra days every single time rather than cross certain stretches of the deep Atlantic. The French Admiralty destroyed a man's life rather than let his evidence reach the public. We know what they saw now. We have photographs. We have footage. We have the 5.5-meter arm that came up with Kubodera's bait line. We have the confirmed species, the confirmed size range, the confirmed distribution, the confirmed behavior. What we don't have is an explanation for the compression damage on the calm weather wrecks. What we don't have is Linnaeus's reason for removing the entry. What we don't have is any idea of how large the largest specimens actually get, because we have never encountered an adult in open water. The ocean is still the ocean. The dark is still the dark. The sperm whales are still diving to feed on something we have never fully seen, and the circular scars on their bodies are still bigger than the suckers of any specimen we have ever recovered. And the wrecks are still on the bottom. With their unanswered questions and their compression damage and their coordinates in old logs sitting right now in maritime archives in France and England and Portugal, waiting for someone to look at them the way Pierre Denys de Montfort looked at everything, carefully, without flinching, all the way down. Subscribe to Dead Man's Shore if you want to keep going into these places with me. Every episode, we find the thing that history decided to leave out. The specific, documented, deeply uncomfortable thing that the official version moved past because it didn't fit the story the empires needed to tell. There is a lot of ocean left, and a lot of wrecks we haven't found yet.